Creating a good villain is no easy feat. A complex and entertaining antagonist is a whole lot for a game's narrative. Now there are plenty of games out there whose big bads are just simply that, bad. But villains who are villainous for a reason or have a very valid point despite being absolutely awful are always more compelling to go up against, and enrich the gameplay experience. So today we're taking a look at a few villains in particular who turned out to have a really solid point, and were theoretically right about the things they were fighting for. Here are our picks for the top 10 video game villains that were right the whole time. And of course there are some major spoilers for a slew of video games on this list, because we basically explained the ending, so heads up for that, friends. Starting off at number 10, Ryder White from Dead Island. Dead Island is a survival horror action RPG released in 2011 that centers itself on surviving a zombie-infested open world, with the goal being to escape the island that you're on. In the main campaign of the game, the antagonist is Ryder White, who actively makes life difficult for the survivors on the island, and even steals a vaccine from them. There's a big conflict with him towards the end of the game in which he kills his zombie wife and then he himself turns into a monster. But turns out there's a reason why he was so damn awful all along. He was being manipulated by a terrorist who had been playing both sides against each other. He was pretending to be Ryder to screw with you, while making Ryder work to clear the zombies off the island with the promise of giving him a vaccine to cure his wife. But it is too late for Ryder after the terrorist, Kevin Sharon, gets locked up. Survivors think he's the bad guy, and when he tries to use the vaccine, it turns him into that monster thanks to it being just an accelerated form of the zombie virus. Really, he's a tragic dude who was taken advantage of and never got the chance to tell the survivors the whole truth behind his death. Moving on to a less depressing number now, in at 9, Handsome Jack from Borderlands 2. In the second Borderlands game, Handsome Jack is the self-imposed ruler of the planet Pandora, and spends the entirety of the title feeding you information as you progress. And despite all of the bad things he's done, if you think about it, Jack's priority is the people of Pandora. The only two places on the planet that are established and functional are Lynchwood and Opportunity, places that he had started up, whereas the rest of the planet is kind of a free-for-all. Sure, he's a narcissist who is responsible for killing lots of people, including his own grandmother who, to be fair, abused him, but his tyrant rule is an attempt to clean up the planet and make it habitable. And at 8, N from Pokemon Black and White. N is the antagonist of these Pokemon titles and takes a very poignant stance on the world of these beloved creatures. N believes that Pokemon should be free, allowed to roam and not become victimized by Pokemon trainers catching them and forcing them into battles. And if you think about it, if Pokemon were real, you know PETA and every other animal rights organization would share that same opinion. And while this number is arguably subjective in terms of whether or not N was, proven right, here's one reason why you should believe him. The dude has the ability to speak to Pokemon, so he knows what they're thinking and feeling. By the end of the games though, N believes that his ideals were mistaken. So like we said, whether or not you think he had a point all along is pretty subjective. But he does have a pretty good argument there. And at 7, the Elusive Man from Mass Effect. The Elusive Man was a character who first appeared in Mass Effect 2. He's a dude who used to be known as Jack Harper and has now concerned himself with the preservation of mankind, so much so that it has become an obsession. An obsession that he is willing to do anything for in order to keep humanity afloat. That being said, his way of making this happen is to have humans be in a constant state of superiority over all other races via controlling the Reapers. Not ideal to say the least. But that's the villain with a point trope for you. Means well, but does pretty crappy things to achieve those ideal goals. And at 6, Revolver Ocelot from Metal Gear Solid. Revolver Ocelot is pretty darn nefarious. Dude has murdered people, treats torture like it's a hobby, and has even gotten his hands on nuclear weapons, fully intent on using them. That's bad. All in all, definitely falls into the villain category. But then came along Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots. It's revealed that Ocelot has been putting on one hell of a show, all as a means to bring an end to an Illuminati-esque organization called the Patriots. Now to be fair, if things worked out the way that Ocelot wanted, the world would likely be in a state of complete anarchy. But his intentions all along were actually pretty respectable. Keyword: intentions. And at 5, The Fireflies from The Last of Us. The Last of Us has been hailed as one of the highest critically acclaimed titles of recent years. In it, you're tasked with transporting Ellie, a girl who has become immune to the virus plaguing the planet, and bring her to a specified location where the rebellion, called the Fireflies, is located. When you get there, you find out that you've been duped somewhat. The Fireflies plan on using Ellie to cure the disease, but in order to do so, they would have to kill her. That's something that protagonist Joel refuses to do. He ends up escaping with Ellie once their plan has become apparent, and eventually lies to Ellie, informing her that there was nothing more she could do, when in fact, her death could have possibly made a difference in finding a cure. But that's what Joel chose, making the title even more of an emotional punch to the gut. While the Fireflies aren't generally seen as villains or antagonists from the start of the game, the truth about their intentions, while noble and with humanity's best interests at heart, results in a jarring reveal, and one that, despite knowing what the right thing is to do, is something we could never imagine actually going through with. And at 4, King Dede from Kirby's Adventure. In Kirby's Adventure, the game's villain is supposed to be King Dede, the lord of the penguins who steals the Star Rod, a magical object that powers something called the Fountain of Dreams, the source of all good dreams for those who live in Dreamland. Sounds like a Kirby game. You spend most of the game believing he's taken it for personal gain, but something just doesn't seem right. He has broken the rod into 6 pieces and has generals guarding those pieces, but all the generals seem kinda off. They don't really appear to be the fighting type, and one of them even spends the entire boss battle running away from Kirby. Eventually you learn that this cute little fella has committed this crime in order to keep the Star Rod away from the Nightmare, an entity that wants to spread nightmares throughout Dreamland, and can do that via the rod. And Kirby accidentally summons him in the process, so And at 3, William Johnson from Assassin's Creed 3. William Johnson is portrayed as one of the antagonists in Assassin's Creed 3, the 2012 addition to the franchise that takes place in the 18th century during and after the American Revolution, while the Templars, who have long been the antagonists in the series, attempt to gain control of colonies. Johnson is seen as a bad guy because he is a member of the Templars, and has gotten his men to falsely pose as tax collectors amongst other highbrow crimes. But turns out, by the end of the game, you discover that the reason he's been stockpiling money is an attempt to buy the Iroquois island for the Templars in order to protect the indigenous people there. It was a preemptive strike to protect them from the country's new settlers, and despite getting a little aggressive over the whole situation, his goals were only out of the good of humanity rather than personal gain. And yeah, he was right to assume that the colonists would be no good for the Iroquois people. I mean, just take a look at a history book. Well, actually, some history books don't even really mention how bad it was. Just Google search it. It was And at number 2, Saturos and Menardi from Golden Sun. The game's villains bent on breaking Alchemy's seal are Satoru and Menardi, who plan on doing so by releasing something called elemental stars in their respective elemental lighthouses. It turns out you and your gang have been the bad guys all along. Releasing alchemy would allow the world to evolve to a higher plane and become better, but you're misled into thinking that it's a destructive power, and it's a truth that's revealed at the very end of the game. Who doesn't love a good guilt-ridden twist, am I right? Despite this, it's a game definitely worth playing if you have a chance, filled with a bunch of dope mechanics that make for a super fun title. And finally, in our number 1 spot, Pagan Min from Far Cry 4. Let's cap off this list with a mildly depressing number. Yay! Pagan Min is a case of the lesser evil. He's a tyrant, and he forcibly took over Kyrat. The way in which he governs is textbook dictator stuff. Pagan Min's entire life has been the product of turmoil, shining light on why he acts the way that he does. But here's the thing, despite ruling a pretty oppressive regime, he is the lesser evil compared to what does pop up in Kyrat in his absence. Your actions in Far Cry 4 are arguably responsible for kicking off a new civil war. In the game's aftermath, regardless if you let Pagan leave the country peacefully or shoot him, his absence opens up an opportunity for one of 2 groups to claim power. Now, depending on who you sided with earlier in the game, Kyrat can become an authoritarian drug state who forces children to become soldiers. Or Kyrat will become a religious fundamentalist theocracy where its opposition is executed. Yeah. And if you just wait politely at the beginning of the game and not wander off, Pagan actually helps you spread your mother's ashes and then invites you to shoot guns with him. So really, that is the only route in the game that, doesn't cause more damage. There we have it. What other video game villains had a point that you can think of? Give us a shout in those comments below and share your thoughts. If you dug this video, spread the love, hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to Top 10 Gaming for more lists just like this one. In the meantime, thanks for watching, friends. I'll catch you on the next video.